David had been attending the same book discussion group for nearly 8 months now. Every Thursday evening, a small group would gather at the community center to talk about whatever novel they'd chosen that month. Most people would share their thoughts and leave within an hour. But there was one woman who always stayed behind, and their conversations about books would stretch long after everyone else had gone home. Her name was Lisa. And she had this incredible way of understanding stories. She could see layers in characters that David had completely missed. When they disagreed about a book, which happened often, she never made him feel foolish. Instead, she'd lean forward with genuine curiosity and ask him to explain his perspective. Those debates became the highlight of his week. One Thursday, as they were both packing up their things, Lisa did something unexpected. She paused, looked at him directly, and asked if he'd like to come over for dinner on Saturday, just the two of them. Her voice was calm, but David noticed she was fidgeting with her car keys as she waited for his answer. His heart started beating faster. This was different from their usual coffee shop meetings or their talks at the community center. This felt significant. He managed to say yes, trying to keep his voice steady, and she smiled before writing her address on a piece of paper. Saturday evening arrived too quickly and too slowly at the same time. David changed his shirt 3 times before settling on something casual but neat. He picked up a decent bottle of wine from the store, second-guessing his choice at least 5 times. When he finally stood outside her apartment door at exactly 7 o'clock, he had to take a deep breath before knocking. Lisa opened the door, and David felt his nervousness spike. She looked beautiful in a simple dark blue dress, her hair down instead of pulled back like she usually wore it. The apartment behind her glowed with warm lighting, and he could smell something delicious cooking. She stepped back to let him in, and as he crossed into her home, she gently touched his arm. Her fingers were light, barely there, but the gesture made him look at her face. She was smiling, but it was a different kind of smile than he'd seen before. It was knowing and kind at the same time. "Let's not rush this night," she said softly. Those 6 words changed everything about how David had been thinking about the evening. He'd been nervous about what might happen, worried about making the right moves at the right times, concerned about reading signals correctly. But her simple statement released all that pressure. She wasn't expecting anything except for them to enjoy the time together. There was no invisible clock ticking, no script they needed to follow. He exhaled without realizing he'd been holding his breath. "Okay," he said, and meant it. Lisa led him into her kitchen, where she was in the middle of preparing dinner. She admitted, almost shyly, that she'd decided to try making something new, which meant there was a decent chance it might not turn out perfectly. David appreciated the honesty. It made everything feel more real, less like a performance. He offered to help, and she put him to work chopping vegetables while she handled the main dish. They fell into an easy rhythm, talking about their week, laughing. When she nearly dropped a pot lid, the kitchen felt comfortable, lived in. There were plants on the windowsill, books stacked on a nearby shelf, a calendar on the wall, with various appointments written in different colored pens. When dinner was ready, they sat at her small dining table. The food was good, even if the chicken was a little dry, and the sauce wasn't quite as smooth as it probably should have been. David told her it was delicious, and he wasn't just being polite. There was something special about eating a meal that someone had made specifically for you. Imperfections and all. As they ate, their conversation flowed naturally. They talked about the book they were currently reading for the group, about movies they'd seen recently, about a funny thing that had happened at David's workplace. But underneath the casual topics, there was an awareness between them, a recognition that something was shifting in their relationship. Lisa poured more wine into their glasses, and David noticed how the candlelight caught in her eyes. He wondered what she was thinking, whether she was as nervous as he was, whether she could hear his heart pounding whenever their hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the breadbasket. The evening stretched ahead of them, full of possibility. And for the first time in a long time, David wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere else. After dinner, they moved to the living room with their wine glasses. Lisa's apartment was cozy without being cluttered. The couch faced a large window that looked out over the quiet street below. Rain had started falling while they ate, creating soft patterns on the glass that caught the light from the street lamps outside. Lisa curled up on one end of the couch, tucking her feet underneath her. David sat on the other end, leaving space between them. He was acutely aware of that space, of how easy it would be to close it, and of how Lisa's words at the door kept echoing in his mind. "Don't rush. Can I tell you something?" Lisa asked, breaking a comfortable silence. Her voice was quieter now, more serious than it had been during dinner. David nodded, setting his wineglass down on the coffee table. "My dad passed away 3 years ago," she began, looking down at her hands. "It was sudden. A heart attack. He was only 62. And I know this might sound strange, but his death changed how I think about time." She paused, gathering her thoughts. David stayed quiet, giving her space to continue. "Before that, I was always rushing toward the next thing. Next promotion. Next relationship milestone. Next achievement. I had this timeline in my head for how my life should go. But when Dad died, I realized that all that rushing made me miss what was actually happening in the present. I'd been so focused on getting somewhere that I forgot to actually be somewhere." David felt something tighten in his chest. He understood more than she knew. "After he died, I promised myself I'd stop living like that. I'd stop treating moments like checkboxes to tick off. I'd actually pay attention to what was right in front of me." She looked up at him then, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. "That's what I meant earlier, about not rushing tonight." David took a moment before responding. "I was engaged once," he said, surprising himself with the admission. "About 2 years ago. Her name was Jessica, and she had everything planned out. When we'd get married, when we'd buy a house, when we'd have kids. Everything was scheduled, organized, controlled." Lisa listened without interrupting, her expression open and understanding. "And I went along with it because I thought that was what you were supposed to do. Be responsible, have a plan, follow the steps. But somewhere in all that planning, we forgot to actually connect with each other. We were so busy arranging our future that we didn't have a present." She ended things 8 months before the wedding, and honestly, I wasn't even that surprised. We'd stopped being real with each other a long time before that. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling vulnerable. "Since then, I've been kind of stuck. Too afraid to plan anything, but also too afraid to just let things happen naturally. I've been in this weird limbo where I'm not moving forward or backward. Just existing." Lisa shifted slightly closer on the couch, not too close, but enough that the distance between them felt a little less vast. "I think that's why I invited you tonight," she said. "You're the first person in a long time who doesn't make me feel like I need to be anywhere but where I am. Our conversations at the book group, they feel real. You don't perform for me. You just are." David felt warmth spread through his chest. "You make me want to try again," he admitted. "But differently this time. I don't want to rush toward some imaginary finish line. I just want to see what happens if I actually pay attention to how I feel instead of how I think I should feel." The rain outside had gotten heavier, drumming steadily against the window. The sound created a kind of cocoon around them, making the rest of the world feel distant and irrelevant. "How do you feel right now?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David considered the question seriously. "Nervous," he said honestly. "But in a good way. Like standing at the edge of something important. And grateful. Really grateful that you invited me here. That you trusted me enough to share what you shared." "Send," Lisa smiled, and this time it reached all the way to her eyes. "I'm nervous too," she confessed. "I haven't done this in a while. Haven't let myself want something. Want someone. It's scary." "Yeah," David agreed. "It really is." They sat there together, neither of them needing to fill the silence with more words. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, something delicate and precious was beginning to grow between them. Something worth taking time with. Something worth not rushing. Around 11 o'clock, Lisa got up and walked over to an old record player sitting on a shelf near the window. David watched as she carefully selected a vinyl record from the collection beside it and placed it on the turntable. A moment later, soft jazz music filled the room, the kind with gentle piano and smooth saxophone that felt like it belonged to another era. "My grandmother left me this," Lisa said, running her fingers along the edge of the record player. "She had hundreds of records. Most of them are big band and jazz from the 40s and 50s. I used to visit her every Sunday, and she'd play these for me while we had tea. She'd tell me stories about dancing to this music when she was young." David stood and walked over to look at the collection. The records were well kept, their covers faded but intact. Some had notes written on them in careful handwriting. "She sounds like she was special. She was the one who taught me about taking time," Lisa said. "She'd always say that young people today are in too much of a hurry, that we forget to savor things." I didn't really understand what she meant until after she was gone. They stood side by side, looking at the records. David pulled out one with a worn blue cover. "Mind if I look through these?" "Please do," Lisa said. She seemed pleased that he was interested. For the next while, they went through the collection together. Lisa would pull out a record and tell him a story about it, or David would find one and ask about it. She knew something about nearly every album, whether it was a memory from her grandmother or something she'd learned about the artist later. David found himself watching her hands as she spoke. She had expressive hands, always moving to emphasize a point or trace the outline of something in the air. There was a silver ring on her middle finger that caught the lamplight when she gestured. He wondered about its story but didn't ask. Some things could wait to be discovered. When their eyes met over a particularly old record, neither of them looked away quickly. The moment stretched, full of unspoken things. David felt the pull to move closer, to close the distance between them. But Lisa's words from earlier still held him back. Not because he didn't want to, but because he was learning to trust that some things were better when you let them develop naturally. Lisa set the record back in its place and walked over to a large bookshelf that took up most of one wall. "Want to see what else I've collected over the years?" The bookshelf was impressive, packed with novels, poetry collections, biographies, and books on various subjects from gardening to astronomy. Many of the books looked well read, their spines creased, pages dog-eared. David ran his fingers along the titles, recognizing many of them. "You write in your books," he said, surprised, as he pulled out a copy of a novel they'd discussed months ago in the book group. The margins were filled with notes in blue ink, underlining, questions, and observations. Lisa looked almost defensive for a second. "I know some people think that's wrong, but I can't help it. Books should be lived in. They're not meant to just sit pristine on a shelf. They're meant to be engaged with, argued with, absorbed into your life." David flipped through the pages, reading some of her notes. They revealed a depth of thought that impressed him. Questions about character motivations, connections to other books, personal reactions to certain passages. "This is incredible," he said. "It's like having a conversation with you through the book." "That's exactly what it is," Lisa said, moving closer to look over his shoulder. "When I read, I'm having a conversation with the author and with myself. The notes are how I remember those conversations." They pulled out more books, comparing which ones they both owned, debating interpretations, discovering new layers to stories they thought they'd fully understood. David found a worn copy of his favorite novel and was delighted to see Lisa's notes throughout it. "This book changed my life when I was 23, she said, taking it from his hands and flipping to a specific page. "I was going through a really hard time, feeling lost. And this passage right here made me realize that being lost is sometimes part of finding yourself." She read the passage aloud, and David listened to the words in her voice, watching her face as she spoke. There was something intimate about this, about being let into her inner world through these books and notes and memories. It felt more personal than any physical closeness could have been. When she finished reading, she looked up at him. "What about you? What book changed your life?" David thought for a moment. "There was this book I read right after my engagement ended. It was about a man learning to build things with his hands after losing everything that defined him. It reminded me that you can always start over, that you can learn new skills, become a new version of yourself, even when you think you're too old or too stuck." "Did you?" Lisa asked. "Start over?" I'm trying to, David said honestly. I think tonight is part of that. Lisa smiled, that knowing smile again. She put the book back on the shelf, and their hands brushed. Neither of them pulled away immediately. They stood there, hands touching lightly, surrounded by books and music and the sound of rain. Both of them understanding that they were in the middle of something that couldn't be rushed, something that needed time to become what it was meant to be. Midnight came and went without either of them noticing. They'd moved back to the couch, this time sitting closer together, though still not touching except for the occasional brush of shoulders when one of them leaned over to emphasize a point. The wine bottle sat empty on the coffee table. The rain outside had intensified, creating a steady rhythm that made the world beyond Lisa's apartment feel very far away. They'd been talking for hours, the kind of conversation that winds through dozens of topics and somehow always feels connected. But now, a comfortable silence had settled between them. David sat with his head resting against the back of the couch, feeling more relaxed than he had in months, maybe years. Lisa was looking out the window at the rain, her profile soft in the lamplight. Then she spoke, her voice quiet. I almost canceled 3 times. David turned to look at her. What? This dinner. I almost called you and made up an excuse. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. On Thursday, I was sure I was going to do it. Then Friday, I actually drafted a text saying I wasn't feeling well. Saturday morning, I stood in my kitchen and thought about what the easiest way to back out would be. Why didn't you? David asked, genuinely curious. Lisa was quiet for a moment, considering. Because I was tired of being scared. I've spent 3 years telling myself that I'm living in the present, that I'm not rushing, that I'm taking my time with life. And that's all true, but I've also been using it as an excuse to not take any risks at all, to not want anything, to not hope for anything. 2 plays head. 2 plays head. She turned to face him fully. And then you showed up at the book group 8 months ago. And slowly, without me even realizing it was happening, I started wanting something again. Started hoping. And that was terrifying. David felt his throat tighten. He understood exactly what she meant. After his engagement ended, he'd built walls without even realizing it. He'd told himself he was being careful, being smart, protecting himself. But really, he'd just been hiding. I'm scared too, he admitted, the words coming easier than he expected. Every time I see you, I'm scared. Not of you. Of how much I look forward to seeing you, of how different I feel when I'm around you. I keep thinking that if I care too much too fast, I'll mess everything up. I'll push too hard or expect too much, or somehow ruin this before it even has a chance to become something. Lisa rested her chin on her knees, watching him. What do you want this to become? It was a simple question, but it hit him hard. What did he want? After 2 years of not wanting anything, of keeping his heart carefully locked away, what did he actually want? I don't know exactly, he said slowly. But I know I want more of this. More conversations. More time with you. More of feeling like I can be completely honest about what I'm thinking and you won't judge me for it. More of discovering things about you. Like your grandmother's records and your notes in books and the way you scrunch your nose when you disagree with something but you're trying to be polite about it. Lisa laughed softly. I do not scrunch my nose. You absolutely do, David said, grinning. Every single book group meeting when someone says something you think is ridiculous. She shook her head, but she was smiling. Then her expression turned more serious. I want those things too. But I also want to do this right. I don't want to rush into something just because it feels good right now. I want to build something that lasts. Even if that takes longer. What does doing it right look like? David asked. Lisa thought about it. I think it means being honest. Like we're being now. It means taking time to really know each other. Not just the good parts but the complicated parts too. It means being okay with slow, with patient, with letting things develop naturally instead of forcing them into some predetermined shape. David nodded. Everything she was saying resonated with him deeply. I can do slow. I want to do slow. After Jessica, I promised myself that if I ever tried again, I'd do it differently. I'd actually pay attention to how things feel, instead of how they look on paper. How does this feel? Lisa asked. David considered the question carefully. It feels right. Scary, but right. Like standing at the beginning of something important. Something I don't want to mess up. Lisa uncurled herself and shifted closer to him on the couch. She reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. Her hand was warm and steady. Then let's not mess it up. Let's take our time. Let's be patient with each other, and with whatever this is becoming. David squeezed her hand gently. Deal. They sat like that for a long time, hands intertwined, not needing to fill the silence with more words. The physical connection was simple but significant. A small step forward that felt right for this moment. There would be time for more later. Time for everything. That was the whole point. Outside, the rain continued its steady drumming. Inside, two people who had been hiding from wanting anything were learning to hope again. Learning to trust that some things were worth the risk. Worth the wait. Worth doing slowly and carefully and right. David woke to brightness behind his eyelids, and the unfamiliar feeling of sunlight on his face from the wrong angle. For a moment, he was disoriented, his mind foggy with sleep. Then memory filtered back, Lisa's apartment, the long conversation, the wine and music and rain. He opened his eyes and found himself on Lisa's couch, covered with a soft gray blanket he didn't remember getting. His shoes were off, placed neatly side by side near the door. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Bright and clean. The rain had stopped sometime during the night. David sat up slowly, running his hand through his hair. He checked his watch, and was surprised to see it was almost 9 o'clock. The last thing he clearly remembered was sitting on the couch with Lisa. Their hands linked together, talking about her grandmother's recipes. He must have fallen asleep sometime after 2 in the morning. The smell of coffee drifted in from the kitchen, rich and inviting. He heard the quiet sounds of movement. Cabinet doors opening and closing. The clink of mugs. Lisa appeared in the doorway, and David's breath caught slightly. She was wearing comfortable gray sweatpants, and an oversized cream-colored sweater that hung off one shoulder. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun with strands falling loose around her face. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and in the morning light, she looked even more beautiful than she had the night before. "Good morning," she said, her voice still a little rough with sleep. She was holding 2 coffee mugs, steam rising from both. "I wasn't sure how you take it, so I brought everything." She set the mugs on the coffee table along with small containers of cream and sugar. David smiled, still feeling a bit groggy. "Just a little cream, thanks." Lisa prepared both their coffees and handed him one before settling onto the couch beside him, leaving a comfortable distance between them. She tucked her feet up under herself and wrapped both hands around her mug. "I'm sorry I fell asleep on your couch," David said, feeling slightly embarrassed. "Don't be. You looked peaceful, and it was late. I wasn't going to wake you up just to send you home at 2 in the morning." She took a sip of her coffee, looking at him over the rim of her mug. "Besides, I liked knowing you were here. It felt nice, comfortable." They sat in easy silence for a few minutes, both of them waking up slowly, sipping their coffee. Through the window, David could see that the morning was beautiful. The kind of clear, fresh day that often follows a heavy rain. Everything looked washed clean. "Thank you," David said after a while. "For last night. For dinner. For the conversation. For all of it. I can't remember the last time I felt that comfortable just being myself with someone." Lisa smiled, that warm smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "Thank you for staying. For being honest. For not pushing when I said let's take our time." David thought about that. About how nothing had happened between them last night beyond conversation and connection. No big dramatic moment. No kiss at the door. No rush toward anything physical. And yet, somehow, the evening had felt more intimate than any other he could remember. They'd shared stories, vulnerabilities, fears, hopes. They'd let each other see the real, unpolished versions of themselves. "I was thinking," Lisa said, wrapping her sweater tighter around herself, "maybe we could do this again. Not rush toward anything. Just spend time together. Learn about each other. See where things go naturally." "I'd really like that," David said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. "Thursday, there's the book group, obviously," Lisa continued. "But maybe Saturday we could do something during the day? There's a farmer's market downtown that I love. We could walk around, get some lunch, just hang out." "That sounds perfect," David agreed. They finished their coffee while talking about nothing important and everything important at the same time. The kind of morning conversation that feels lazy and comfortable, where long pauses aren't awkward and easy, laughter comes naturally. Eventually, David knew he needed to get going. He had things to do, and he didn't want to overstay his welcome. Lisa walked him to the door, and they stood there for a moment in the small entryway, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "So," Lisa said, "Thursday at the book group?" "Thursday," David confirmed. Then, feeling brave, he added, "And Saturday at the farmer's market?" "Saturday," she agreed, smiling. Lisa leaned forward and kissed his cheek, her lips soft and warm against his skin. It was brief and sweet, and her hand rested lightly on his chest for just a moment before she stepped back. The gesture was perfect in its simplicity, a promise of more to come without rushing anything. David walked down the stairs and out into the bright morning, already looking forward to Thursday, to Saturday, to whatever came next. He felt lighter than he had in years, like he'd put down a heavy weight he'd been carrying without realizing it. The world felt full of possibility again. Not in the anxious, scheduled way it had felt with his ex-fiancée, where everything had to be planned and controlled, but in an open, hopeful way, a way that trusted in time and patience and the natural unfolding of things that were meant to be. He thought about Lisa's words from the night before. "Let's not rush this night." And they hadn't. They'd let it unfold at its own pace, and it had been better for it. They'd built something real in those hours of conversation and honesty, a foundation they could continue to build on slowly, carefully, one moment at a time. David walked down the sidewalk with the morning sun on his face, already thinking about what book he'd pick for Saturday, what stories they'd share next, what parts of themselves they'd reveal as they continued this slow, beautiful journey of getting to know each other. For the first time in 2 years, he wasn't afraid of wanting something, wasn't afraid of hoping. Lisa had reminded him that some things were worth the wait, worth doing right, worth taking your time with, and he couldn't wait to see where that patience would lead them.